In terms of what questions they ask for labor markets, they follow a similar trend. So, for example, in 2017, they asked, what are the policies used to reduce the gender pay gap? Um, and then in 2021, they asked, what are the best policies to reduce the ethnic pay gap? And then in 2022, they asked, should governments intervene to basically reduce pay gaps in the gig economy?
Oh yeah, I did that as an exam.
Yeah. So generally, if they were to ask another question, assuming you get a bit lucky, the question is most likely to be about a random pay gap, such as a regional pay gap, or maybe even pay gaps between like it could be male and female again, but unlikely, or it could be like just between industries like footballers versus teachers. But in general, how to reduce some kind of a pay gap. And each time you can kind of apply similar policies. But before we go into that, one of the most important things to understand is the forces of supply and demand for labor. So if we just looked at the labor market, just really quickly, make sure you're able to define a labor market as a place where buyers and sellers, sorry, workers, it's not a normal market, workers and employers meet to exchange um, work for wages or factors of production. You can say that part however you like. And then, so demand for labor is the number of people who firms are willing and able to hire. So number of people who firms are willing and able to hire at any given wage. And supply of labor is the number of workers, number of people who are willing and able to work at any given wage. From there, we can look at the factors that affect these. And these are the factors that in a free market determine wage as well. Because any shift in supply or any shift in demand is going to change the wage. So these are the things that will explain why different people earn different wages. So for demand for labor, I like to think of three main things. One is the fact that it's a derived demand. So any changes in the demand or any differences in the demand for the good or the service that the workers make would change the demand for the workers itself. So for example, um, there's a huge demand to watch football compared to, or for example, there's a huge demand to watch men's football and a medium demand to watch women's football. So then the demand for male footballers will be higher than the demand for female footballers because they might need bigger squads to play more matches and more tournaments. The second thing is the workers' um, productivity. So workers who are more productive would attract more demand. Um, and then the
You know,
last,
with
yeah,
with productivity,
yeah,
say workers are more productive. Would that mean that firms are basically willing to pay them more money, more
yeah,
wages?
yeah. Or at any given wage, say a wage is £50, they're gonna hire more workers if they're productive and less workers if they're not productive.
Oh, okay.
So either they'll hire, well, whenever we talk about a shift in demand or supply, we say at any given wage. But yeah, at the same particular wage, you'd hire more workers if they're productive and less workers if they're not productive.
Oh, okay, okay.
Cool. And then the last one is prices of capital. And the reason for that is capital, basically machinery, is the direct substitute to an extra worker. So you could hire an extra maybe 10 workers or you could buy an extra machine or you could hire an extra two workers or buy an extra machine, or depends on the firm. But we see capital as we're simplifying the model, we're seeing capital as the direct substitute to a worker. So if capital becomes cheaper, or I suppose you could also say the quality of capital, then that would make you reduce or increase your demand for labor. It could work both ways though. Your capital could be really good, so you might need workers to use that capital, or it could be that capital is replacing workers, so then demand for workers could go down as well. Um, any idea on factors that affect the supply for labor?
Or would it be maybe immobility um
Good.
of workers?
Yeah,
So say there's a lot of workers in the north and there's a lot of jobs in London, there wouldn't be like a lot of supply because they're very immobile, maybe because of like family or current situations that they're in.
yeah, good. Perfect. And
Would
then
it be
what?
like training and education as well? So that's like occupational mobility.
Yeah, exactly. That links into mobility, but that's perfect. And then there's just one more thing that's missing. Um, apart from mobility, you know how I said that capital is the direct substitute to hiring a worker? What's the direct substitute for us compared to working? So if we either work or something else.
Would
Oh,
that
just
be
live on benefits.
now would that be like leisure?
Yeah, leisure, exactly. So in the same way that a company could decide to either hire a worker or hire a machine, sorry, buy a machine, a person could either decide to work an extra hour or have an extra hour of leisure. So these are some of them, but you just need to know two or three in detail, but especially occupational mobility and barriers to entry. But you could also talk about non-monetary conditions. So if you pay £50 per hour, but um, the working conditions are better, then there'll be more quantity of workers willing and able to work at that given wage. Or if barriers to entry were lower, if you no longer need an exam to become a uh, teacher or something, then the quantity of people who are willing and able to do it will increase. So anything that will increase how many people would work. If you get stuck, just use common sense and use your own scenario. So suppose wage is still fixed, what factors would entice you to work? Or what?
Like a good team.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. Yeah. And benefits and if it's close by, like Kieran said. So yeah.
Yeah.
Does you know with the supply of labor and everything, does this all kind of tie into incentives basically?
Yeah. Yeah. But is any incentive apart from money?
Oh, okay.
Because money, like price is always considered as part of the supply curve. But if you're thinking about shifting the supply curve, it has to be any factor apart from wage.
Okay.
Cool.
Oh, so like if there were like better conditions in teaching than there were in like, I don't know, teaching in secondary schools than there were teaching in primary schools, then the supply of labor for secondary schools do like shift to the right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay,
And then
cool.
we can do really simple, before we get to even the hard diagrams, we could use like really, really simple diagrams. So just suppose we're talking about um the differences in wages between um like female footballers and male footballers. Let's just say, but for now, let's imagine they both have the same amount of supply, but the demand for um male footballers is very, very high. So it'll be up here. And then the demand for female footballers would be like here. So you could literally draw a very simple diagram of two different demand curves, so men and then women. And then that would show why wage for male footballers is up here and female footballers is down here.
You know, when it comes to kind of diagrams, does the complexity kind of determine whether you got a high mark or not, or will it be just explaining the diagram?
I would just say to do the most, I would say to do the most complicated diagram that you know 100%. But if you only know the basic diagrams, just do the basic diagrams well, and it should be completely fine. If you have
Okay.
enough time, I mean, everyone here has like 3 weeks until the exam, but in that time, try and learn all diagrams one by one. But if
Okay.
into an exam and you don't know the complicated diagrams, that's fine. Just do the basic diagrams. Like that's why I'm showing you this one. Just do
Yeah.
it really well.
Okay.
Um, okay. So a couple of definitions. Also one last thing. we, as well as demand and supply, we can also talk about PED for labor and PES for labor. So basically, elasticity is about, remember, it's about how many, it's about if wages go up, would a lot of people, if wages go up, would demand go up a lot? Or, sorry, okay, PD, how demand for labor changes given a change in wage. So if wage went up by £10, would you completely stop wanting to hire workers, or would you still hire a lot of workers? And then supply of labor, PES, is basically about if wages went up, would a lot more people work or not a lot more people? So it's the quantity, it's how supply changes given a change in wage. So supply is easier to picture because we would see ourselves more as workers right now. So if you guys had a part-time job and you were paid, say, £15 an hour, suppose your boss said, I'll give you £200 an hour. How many hours would you work? So some people might say they might work 10 more hours a week, like one more day a week. Some people might say they might work 4 hours more, 4 days more a week, or some people might not work any more days in that same week, even though they're getting offered a lot more money. That's basically what PES is. And for example, if you have your A-level exam tomorrow and you were offered £100 an hour to work today, you might say no because you've got something important to do tomorrow or today. So that's what PES is. So the factors affecting PES are basically the skills required, the length of your training period, and time. Okay. So time, training, other commitments. And then PED is like, suppose you own a business and you hire workers at £15 an hour. If the number of workers, if the wage went down to £5 an hour, would you hire a lot more workers or would you still just keep to what you have? That's what PED is about. So that's based on time
Could,
again. Sorry, go on.
could you say like you know how there's like national living wage and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Could you say like if the national living wage went up like a pound or two and like I don't know, say the owners of your place were like to the manager, yeah, I want you to increase the wages 13. Could you like say that's obviously going to decrease the PED for labor in that business? Because the manager might be like, no, I don't really want to hire that many people anymore if it's going to be way more because the costs are going to increase.
It's kind of like proportional to wait. The PED wouldn't change because of that, but that would tell you if PED is high or low, basically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I meant.
Yeah, that's what you meant. So if suppose the national minimum wage went up and you have a decision to make and you decide to cut down on some workers, or if you decide to stick to how many workers you have, that's basically telling you your PED. So if you don't change your quantity, you're inelastic. If you change your quantity, you're elastic.
Okay, cool.
And one of the main factors is proportion of total cost. So it's kind of like normal PED. If the price of Fanta goes up from 50p to 60p, then people are still going to buy it because it's a low proportion of the money that you have. And in terms of PED for labor, if wage went up from £8 to £9, the company is still going to hire you because it's a small proportion of total cost. But if some people's wages, like managers or directors' wage went up from 100,000 to 120,000, then they might like cut down on how many hours they work or cut down on if they have two senior managers to one, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Is
also,
there ever, oh, sorry, Karen?
on.
Now, is there ever like an instance where I guess the demand for labor or supply for labor is inelastic, where there's always going to be like a high demand, or where the amount of wages the firm will always need to have the specific amount of workers.
Mm, wait, let me say my last thing and then come back to that question because
Yeah, no worries.
so the last one is substitutability of capital. So it kind of links onto your question as well. So if you have 100 workers doing something and wage doubles, but there's no way you can replace that job with any type of machine, then you might have to still hire them. But if you can replace them, some of them with machines, then you might just do that. So it depends on literally these three factors. So you'd basically be inelastic if you have no time to think about it. So if it's like next day, you can't just sack workers in one day. This one, if you can't replace the workers with machines, then they'll be inelastic. And if they are a small proportion of your total cost, then you'll still keep them as well. One more definition, and then we'll look at questions. So wage discrimination. Wage discrimination is just when two workers earn different wages for doing the same job. And if that comes up, or it might just be an evaluation, and you could just talk about how that should be illegal and the government just need to stamp down on it.
So it's kind of like price discrimination in like the first degree or whatever. Not the first degree, third degree.
Kind of, but not really, because price discrimination also has like benefits. Like you can talk about how
Oh yeah, true.
it could be good, like you get student discount and stuff. But wage discrimination is like based on gender or ethnicity or stuff that shouldn't matter.
Yeah, I got you.
But on the other hand, wage differentials, they can be explained. So your essays would be about this rather than this, but wage discrimination can come up as your evaluation if you wanted to. So wage differentials are when two workers earn different wages for doing two different jobs or for having different skills. And then yeah, wage different discrimination is when two workers earn different wages for doing the same job. And now we're just going to put all this together and look at some essays. So basically, the big questions are always about wage differentials in labor markets, and they'll either be to explain the wage differentials or how to solve the wage differentials, or if we need to solve the wage differentials. I'm going to leave the if we need to solve it out because that would be more part of the inequality topic. But firstly, let's just look at some common examples of wage differentials. So remember, wage differentials are stuff apart from discrimination. So you could argue that they are fair or reasonable. So in the past, um, there's been, or now there's still some pay gaps between the genders, and that's because women are economically inactive at their peak. There's a difference in wage, obviously, between a footballer and a teacher, and that's because of the supply and demand being different. There's a north-south pay gap, which could come up this year as well. And that's because, again, the supply or demand is different in London or up north. So let's think about that. The highest skilled workers know that London has a better reputation. So the best, say bankers or doctors, but especially in the corporate world, they're going to try and move to London. So there's going to be a better supply.
Kind of like a brain drain out of the north.
Yeah, but based
Weren't
on,
they weren't they trying to like make the North kind of like London and make it more like economical stuff like that?
yeah, like HS2,
Yeah.
that easy links to places up north. But yeah, but when all that happens, you basically link it to the more productive workers move to London, or in theory at least. So then there's a higher demand for workers in London. Basically, whenever you want to explain wage differentials, always link it to demand for labor because that's the easiest way. You could talk about supply and demand if you want to, but if you're confused, literally just do the first diagram that I drew earlier. Just pretend that supply is the same. So just say, imagine that we have the same supply. One of the main reasons is demand. So one of them has a higher demand and another one has a lower demand. And that's why there's a difference in wages. And when you want to explain that, go back to your factors of demand. So the three factors of demand were literally the productivity, the prices of capital, and what was the other one?
Was it
It was
barriers to entry?
no,
No,
not
sorry, derived demand, I think, right?
yeah, derived demand, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just talk about those. But basically, if you're comparing, and then apply it to the question. So if you're comparing, say, North and South, you can't say that, um, you can say that the derived demand is different. So there's more demand for goods in London, so therefore there's more demand for workers in London. You you can also try to explain that the productivity of workers in London is higher because they just end up moving there. So London has a higher average productivity, or maybe London has better universities and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, and then again, ethnicity, you could just explain that because of language barriers, on average, it's fair to assume that ethnic people may have a lower productivity because of the language barrier. But yeah, the
Okay.
easiest way is just to link it to people with higher wages will have, so why are there pay gaps? It's always going to boil down to literally two reasons. One has a higher demand or one has a lower supply. So low supply means higher wages and high demand has higher wages. This same question, this is really important, yeah. This same question comes up in year 12 in AS economics, but has sometimes come up as well in year 13. Like I think the paper three question last year was something about the price of, was it milk?
I don't know. I didn't look at a paper from last year. I need to look at it.
Oh yeah. But so it would just ask why does what factors affect the price of something? So just suppose I said milk, right? The only two explanations for a difference in price is a shift in demand. So if demand shifts right, then price would go up. And if supply shifts left, then price would go up as well, right? So it's the same thing with wages. So why do two people have different pay? One of them has a higher demand and one of them has a lower supply. And these two things will make their wages higher. So then if you've got this point on lock, which is an easy point about productivity, then your second point could always be about supply. So for example, um, you could say that there's a lower, well, there is a way lower supply of footballers and a way higher supply of teachers. That's because in order to play at the, remember, supply means willing and able to work. Obviously, there's a ton of people who are willing to be a footballer, but there's not a ton of people. There's very, very, very few people who are willing and able to be a footballer because it's the people who have been training since the age of 5 years old, maybe. But with teachers, there's a much higher supply of teachers because they may have done a university degree and they may just decide that they want to be a teacher. So the supply would be much higher.
Mm.
Don't use the point blindly because you can't say that the North has a lower supply than, sorry, you can't say, so the South is the one with higher wages, but you can't say it's because of lower supply. That wouldn't be true. There would probably be a higher supply of workers in the South. So the point doesn't always work. And same with men and women. You can't, in some scenarios, you could say that supply is higher or low. You can't say again, you can't say that there's a lower supply for male footballers than there are for female footballers. So then your argument wouldn't always make sense. But point one, just talk about demand. Point two, maybe talk about supply or elasticity of supply. So for example, this question, it was an Edexcel question, but it's still useful. The question was evaluate why wage differences exist within the UK labor market. I just defined wage differentials And I said one of the reasons is because of a difference in demand. So I literally just explained the factors that shift demand are the derived demand, so derived demand for the good, productivity, and the price of capital. And then I went into more detail, and you can read that afterwards. And then I also said that another reason for wait, who's someone's
My bad. Hold on.
right. And then another reason is because of a difference in supply. So I explained that I think I was talking about footballers versus like medical staff. So I was talking about it in the industry. Then in that case, I would be able to say that there's way more supply of people who want to be like a football medical staff and a very low supply of people who are willing and able to be an actual footballer at the high level. So then I just did a diagram of two different supply and demand curves.
My whole exam is just going to be about footballers.
That'd be pretty cool. But yeah,
It's not about a case
um,
study or not.
We better be basketball, can't I?
Well, you can say, I guess you can say like basketball, like literally the same thing, like
yeah.
basketball and basketballers,
Yeah.
Mm.
especially in America.
Yeah, it could be the same. It could be the same for like any sport, to be honest.
Yeah. Or even like if you're talking about gender pay gaps, it could be in like industries like banking, that could be another one. Or like at the BBC, or ITV or something.
Oh yeah, like a
But
little case study, yeah.
there's random news articles about like CEOs being like women.
Paid way less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But and that's I think is improved now. But if papers are made a couple of years ago, then those were like popular articles back then. So
I think they did address the gender pay gap thing though, like in like a year or two ago, I think.
yeah,
I might
yeah.
be wrong, but I remember I did a paper from like 2021 or maybe 2022.
Yeah, that question came up in 2017. So like this one right now. So I this was an Edexcel question, the one that I just showed you, but it's really important for your understanding. And now you'll know how to basically apply it to your AQA question. So the way I would always do it is I'd pick a so the question for AQA is normally more about policies. And in terms of policies, paragraph 1 is nice and simple. It's a minimum wage. So obviously it's kind of clear in the diagram, but what's the main disadvantage with just giving somebody a higher minimum wage?
What disadvantages or advantages?
Disadvantage?
Oh, would have been less. Higher cost production.
That's one, but what's the main one? It's on the diagram.
Oh,
Be unemployment.
unemployment.
Yeah, you missed a bit when we were going through the diagrams, Karen, but I'll show you after. Um, but yeah, the main disadvantage of just giving somebody a higher minimum wage is unemployment. And then there's two evaluations for that. Okay. So I'd always start my essay nice and easy. I'd just go, one policy the government could use is to increase the minimum wage. This is a wage below which it is legal to hire workers at, and it must be set above equilibrium. The diagram above shows this, and the wage goes from W to NMW, or you can say W2. And then you can say the quantity of workers, you can say that that could help to reduce the pay gap. But then I start to evaluate and say the issue with this is that it causes an excess supply of labor from here to here. And that would translate to unemployment in the real world. If some workers, for example, I was doing it about women, but let's pretend we're doing the regional one because that could come up this year, for example. So then if some workers up north are now unemployed, this would actually increase the regional pay gap because so the minimum wage in London is higher. I don't know the actual numbers, but suppose it was £15 and the minimum wage up north was £12, and you tried to increase the minimum wage up north, then that would just cause more unemployment up north because businesses up north are not able to hire people at that wage. It's not really feasible for them.
Oh, okay.
And then I went straight into my next paragraph and I said one idea. Another idea would be to just implement a minimum wage only in monopsony markets. Kieran, I'll send you the video, the recording from the start of the lesson, but I go through this
Yeah.
time. More.
Oh, okay.
So, um, another idea would be just for the government to implement a minimum wage only in monopsony labor markets, because it's kind of pointless to implement it just in a free market because it causes unemployment and makes the problem worse. And you could basically explain that that's government failure. So here, I just described what a monopsony is, a sole buyer of labor, and I show that they hire wages at MC equals MRP and underpay and underemploy. The government would be able to implement a minimum wage in this type of market, and that would cause wage to go up from here, I'll call that W1, to here, W2. But the quantity of workers also goes up from QM to QC. Okay. So I go from here to here and from here to here.
So would you say that the government can introduce the minimum wage in the monopoly because there's no where the monopsony can go? Like they're gonna have to accept it because they're the sole buyer of labor and stuff.
Yeah, there's an even better way to phrase it. It's not even that they have to accept it, it's that they'll still actually make profit or still be happy. Because if you think about it, if you take away the minimum wage, MC equals MRP is here at X, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the new MC curve is here. So where's the new MC equals MRP? It's still like it's here. So they could choose to shut down if they wanted to. And they could choose to sack workers if they wanted to, like these guys are doing, but they're actually not, which shows that it's not like, oh, they're a victim, they're helpless. They were literally making so much profit before that they can hire more workers, pay them more, and still make a profit.
So they've got enough like excess profit to do that.
Exactly. They can still profit maximize and hire more workers. Of course, they would make much less profit now, but it stops them from exploiting workers and underpaying them. And it wouldn't cause as much damage as it would in a free market. The damage in a free market is that if you force somebody who's hiring workers based on supply and demand to pay a higher wage, then they would then cut down on workers. But these guys, if you force them to pay a higher wage, they wouldn't cut down on workers necessarily. They would hire more workers still. And they wouldn't even have they wouldn't have an argument really to go and to argue with the policy.
Okay, cool.
But there's still some other evaluations apart from that. So I basically say, in evaluation, you could argue that it might be an unlikely policy because the main monopsony employers is the UK government. In the UK is the government. So for example, teachers, some of them are employed by private schools, but the vast majority of them are employed by state schools. So the state, the government, is a monopsony employer of teachers. Another one is nurses. So some may work for businesses or for private hospitals, but the majority of them would work for the NHS. So the NHS have monopsony power over them. Now, we're in theory, because remember, economics is part theory and part real life. When we drew it in theory, we're assuming the monopsony is like an evil, profit maximizing business. But in real life, there aren't that many monopsonies. For example, if you're a footballer, you could work for Man United or Chelsea or Arsenal, or if you're a banker, you could work for many different banks, or if you're a manager, you could work for so many different shops. So there aren't that many monopsony employers in real life. The main one is the government, but the government don't even make any profit. So you could basically argue, one hand, the government might not want to put a minimum wage on themselves, but even if you take away that argument, in general, say they do it, it would just increase the cost of the government. And the opportunity cost is that if there's a higher minimum wage for teachers, that money is still coming from the taxpayer, or it may come from other, like say, technology, which they're funding to schools or giving laptops and computers, or it might mean that they have to pay nurses less to pay teachers more. So basically, the evaluation is just opportunity cost, and that the government aren't profit maximizers anyway. So if they did hypothetically make a profit on schools, if they were paying more to teachers, it would just affect their other finances like hospitals, firemen, policemen, all sorts of stuff like that. So therefore, even this type of minimum wage may be ineffective, but definitely way more effective than national minimum wage in a free market. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
What would be one last policy? So I've talked about 1/2. You could either do it as two separate paragraphs or one big paragraph, like I did. I talked about a minimum wage and a minimum wage and a monopsony. What's one more policy that could be used to reduce the regional pay gap?
Could you subsidize trade unions?
Yeah, that's a good one. What would the trade unions do, like after you subsidize them?
They would be
So they would.
Wait, that
Oh, sorry.
carry on, carry on.
They got bargaining power, so they would bargain for they would negotiate and with the employees for higher prices, higher wages. Sorry.
Okay, but so what would they do in order to bargain for it? Would it kind of be like a minimum wage where they force them to, or would it be something else?
But there may be like legal action maybe and be like, okay, we're gonna sue you if you don't pay
Okay, so
workers
that's
a
kind of
higher.
like okay. What else? What other ways can a trade union or a group of so remember a trade union at the end of the day is just a group of people, right? So how could a group of nurses or a group of if it's a regional pay
Go on
gap,
strike.
how could a group of people up north ask for higher wages?
Would they go on strike or maybe move down to London for better work?
Yeah, they could threaten to stop working, but
collective bargaining.
yeah, collective bargaining, but what are they bargaining?
Wages.
But a bargain
Their
means
time and work and I guess efforts. So if you don't pay us
Like
more, we're
working
gonna
conditions too.
but yeah, they could but okay, good. But a bargain means that they kind of have to offer something as well, right? What could workers offer in order to get higher wages?
could they maybe offer to work more hours
Nah, let's pretend
in
it's per hour still. Let's pretend they want a higher wage per hour. What would they do? But your point so far are right, but there's a better way of explaining this.
I'm not too sure to be honest.
Basically, right? If the trade union is basically forcing a higher wage, the company like there's no legal reason why companies have to say yes to the higher wages unless like the government implement a minimum wage. So, and I always used to get confused by trade unions as well when I was doing my A levels. So you can definitely talk about trade unions in terms of how they can bargain for various things. If you wanted to go down that route, you could say trade unions can bargain for everything apart from wage. In terms of bargaining for wage, they would just bargain straight to the government and do like marches maybe and ask the government to raise the minimum wage. But then we'd just go back down to paragraph 1, which we already talked about. So one thing that they can do is bargain for working conditions. So, okay, we'll keep wage at £20, but you have to give us one more day holiday or one more or like better working conditions, like work from home rather than work at the office, that kind of thing. But the best policy that I would like to talk about is education and training. How would education and training solve this problem?
Would it be that they get more training so they're more productive and then the firms are more incentivized to pay them more?
That's a good one. Incentivize, perfect. If we go back to this question, which we did, what did we say? Like, why did I explain that footballers and male footballers earn more than like female footballers, for example?
Would it be because they bring
Because
in
their
more,
marginal revenue product
yeah,
is
marginal it's
It
higher.
was because of differences in two things. What were the two things?
demand and supply.
Yeah, demand and supply. So, how would education and training affect demand or supply?
Demand would probably go up because, like, obviously, if
You
there's a
want
higher
that?
quality,
Yeah,
I say
workforce, supply would go up as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, supply would go up, yeah.
supply. Well, we don't want supply to go up. If supply goes up, wage goes down.
Actually, no, supply would go down because not many people are willing and able to get the higher training
Yeah,
needed.
supply could go down,
Oh
but
yeah, I mean, it depends if you're trying to make the training like more available.
we don't
Like,
want supply to go up in this case. It makes, but then we're going down a rabbit hole of confusion if we talk about supply. So that's why it's also important to keep things really simple. I remember how I talked about simple diagrams as well. So for
Yeah.
example, here's like a nice smooth chain of reasoning. So I just said another policy instead of minimum wage would be focusing on improving education and training of women, or let's say education and training of workers up north, because the government might believe that the main reason for workers in London to have higher wages is because they are better educated and trained. So I explain that in a free market, wages are determined by supply and demand alone. So if the demand for workers up north is lower than the demand for workers in London, for example, then the best policy would be focusing on improving the demand for labor. Don't talk about supply because it might confuse you unless you're confident in terms of the context, then that's fine as well. So I say demand for labor is determined by the three main factors, which are the demand for the good itself, the prices of capital, and productivity. And I basically explain what MRP is, and then I say, if workers up north or women or teachers or whoever it is was able to undergo education and training, then they would definitely have a higher MRP, which would maybe be higher or equal to the MRP of men or the MRP of people in London.
Could
Or
you say like in relation to women as well? Because obviously like a lot of them have equal training, but they still get paid less. It's like you want to like introduce measures like male paternity leave and stuff like that. So like when like women go and if they have a baby, then obviously like they can actually still be at work
Yeah.
while like
Yeah.
their husband can be at home.
Yeah, so they really introduced that because I remember one of my teachers, he's currently on maternity leave.
Yeah, they definitely have
Yeah.
that like now, but like back in the day when I think my dad like he couldn't take paternity leave, so my mum just had to stay at home the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's more of a high level point, and that's why I was talking about how you can't really necessarily practice that, but it's really good knowledge. But that just depends on the question you have in the moment and the context. Like you can't apply
Yeah,
that same point
Yeah.
to regional like pay gaps, can you? So if you get hints in the context or if you happen to have like really good knowledge, then that's completely fine. But let's focus on just the stuff that we could apply to any question and make that perfect, and then use that as like the icing on top.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we can increase the demand for women by increasing their education and training, which increases their productivity, which increases their demand. And then I do a nice demand shift diagram, and I show that if you're able to get demand higher, I would basically label that as male and female, or I could do demand for female or demand for female after training. And then that's like a really easy diagram that shows me getting wages up. What's the big advantage about this? Because now we have to evaluate it, and evaluation means good and bad things. What's the best part about this method compared to the other methods?
it's probably not going to cause as much like unemployment and stuff. It's
Not
basically
going to
like
cause any unemployment because unemployment in a free market is
yeah,
always zero.
it's basically going to make it like it's just going to improve the
Else?
workforce overall. So
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
Yeah, good.
I guess negatively, it could also like it could cost the government a bit more, kind of like making the education cheaper and stuff.
Yeah, one point that you guys were saying, which I should have said in this paragraph, is you guys were talking about trade unions, and I would have included trade unions in this paragraph if I did this again. I would say that the trade union could be the ones who basically ask for more education and training, or they get all their members and they basically do the education training for them, or they bargain to the government for better education and training just for us women, or basically people up north gather up and say to the government, can you train us so that we're as good as the people in London or better? And then that would be what the trade unions would do in this. But the biggest advantage, so the downside is the opportunity cost. It would also have a high opportunity cost, like the monopsony government thing. But on the plus side, and you can evaluate good and bad, this is the most permanent and long-term solution rather than a quick fix. Okay, and just make sure you explain that well. So first of all, a minimum wage in a free market is a complete quick fix or not even a fix at all, because there's no point giving 20 people a higher wage to cause unemployment of a different 20 people. You're not gonna improve the pay gap at all. This one is a good fix and definitely helpful in the medium term. But if the monopsony is the government, then it causes a lot of other problems and has a high risk of government failure. Apart from opportunity cost, higher education and improvement of education and training will not have any other major risks unless it's like the workers not wanting to undergo the education training or not finding it helpful. But assuming that education and training is good, then it's the most long-term permanent fix. And it would have labor markets is something that can come up in paper 3 because it's macro and micro. And you could talk about the supply side benefits, supply side improvements, and how it's good for the country overall as well. And then I just did some bits and bobs that are related to the question that you were talking about. One really good evaluation here is discrimination. So you see how we talked about the wage difference being because of different demand curves?
Yeah.
I assume that these guys have better productivity and these guys have lower productivity. What else could be the reason that the demand is different?
It could be like,
Kieran, gone?
No, you can carry on, yeah.
I guess yeah, like discrimination, like there could be like biases and stuff like that.
So basically, demand can be different for two groups of people because of 4 reasons. One is derived demand. So there's more derived demand in London compared to up north. The second is productivity. Workers in London are more productive than workers up north. The third is prices of capital, but I'm assuming capital prices would be the same in London and up north. And so those are the 3 factors of demand. But then the 4th factor is discrimination. And that would be the one that you can't do anything about. Well, if it's a regional pay gap, you could be really clever. You could say, I could improve the education and training of workers up north, and then that would increase their demand. But there's nothing I can do about demand in up north. I can't make people go out and buy more stuff up north. If people live more like high spending lives in London, there's nothing I can do about that. So that means I can't really control the demand curve that much. And then the last one is that if there's discrimination of like men versus women, I can't really do anything about that. I can try, but try to put laws in, or maybe even on the bright side, I said that I think I talked about how education and training could increase their MRP, but also it could increase people's perceived MRP of them. So if they see like a bunch of women undergoing like a nice training program, they could just automatically fix their assumptions. And it's not even, when you hire somebody, do you even know their MRP?
No, you don't.
No,
I guess
so all that matters is the perceived MRP, isn't it? So
Yeah.
if you perceive someone's MRP to be higher because they underwent education and training, then boom, you're done. So you could talk about that. Also, in terms of regional pay gaps, if that's the thing that's going to come up, then you could talk about work from home. So the question could be, ooh, that's actually a good one. Yeah, that's a really good point. If the paper was written a couple of years ago, work from home would have been a thing. And then it could be like, why are people who work from Leeds from home earning less than people who work from home in London? And you could talk about how that affects supply and demand as well. And then basically in any conclusion, just talk about summarize what you talked about, pick your favorite of the 3 policies or 2 policies that you did, explain why that's your favorite. So I said, I definitely wouldn't put a minimum wage in a free market. I would put a minimum wage in a monopsony market. But I'd be cautious if it causes government failure, and I would definitely invest in education and training to reduce the pay gap in the long term.